Four students, including an Indian student, have sued the Donald Trump administration for what they alleged was the unlawful termination of their student immigration status, which leaves them at risk of possible deportation. Gaurie, an Indian student studying in the US, along with three other foreign students, filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. This comes amidst the government's immigration crackdown. The students who are studying at the Michigan Public University took the legal route after their status was allegedly terminated unlawfully. The US government said last month that it was only acting against people who are counter to the national interests, such as students with criminal records and others who have participated in protests that are anti-Semitic. But many students have said that they haven't committed any deportable offenses but are still facing the dark, and in fact their future now is under question, which is why this lawsuit could be very important and landmark going forward. Staying with the Trump administration versus students theme, the administration is less than 100 days old, remember, and it has already been undertaking the most sweeping set of changes for immigration. And the fight is not just for the illegal immigrants, but now increasingly for the legal ones, like the students that we've been talking about. But here's the truth, bombshell viewers. Indian students, which comprise the largest chunk of international students in the US, are now exploring other avenues for higher education. And it's not just the US, but the trend now extends to both the UK as well as Canada. There's been a 26% fall in Indian students looking to study in the UK. As per reports, for Canada, that figure stands at 32%. And those reports indicate that it's a whopping 34% when it comes to the US, more than a third actually. Now, what does this trend tell us, and who all does this impact is the big debate on India Global. And as always, the big questions. But before that, let's get the big questions first, and then we get you a soundbite on this. But first up, the big questions, which is that are Chinese students being preferred over Indian students, as some of the data indicates? Which are the new destinations where students may be now looking to go to instead of US, UK and Canada? Can universities actually remain profitable or even viable without the intake of international students? And can Canada, US and the UK actually function without global talent? How will these economies actually function is the key question. As I said, before I open this up for discussion, let's first play up the soundbite by External Affairs Ministry spokesperson Randeep Jaiswal on the climate in which international students are now operating under Trump 2.0.
We are aware that several Indian students have received communication from the US government regarding their F1 visa status, which happens to be the student visa. We are looking into the matter. Our embassy and consulate, they are in touch with the students to provide support.
Prashant, Ajmera joins me along with Sanam Arora from the UK to talk more about what this means and the larger message it's really sending. In fact, Mr. Ajmera, let me start by asking you, are you now receiving more and more requests from Indian students evaluating geographies and opportunities outside the US, UK and Canada?
Yes, that trend is there, but also what you have to see that what has happened in the last, since 2015. When we see the number of students when started going more towards the US and Canada, they all presume that the study abroad is the only way to go abroad. And they thought that they can go to America, they can go to Canada or a UK, these three countries, what we have seen the report today, and they will get a job, they automatically they will get the immigration. But when they reach there, they realize that what they were being told by their agent, consultants, their peers, or from wherever they got the information were not the correct information. So in USA, now it's taking almost 13, 14 years to get your green card from the date you applied. So altogether it's a 20 years journey. Similarly, things happens with respect to the Canadian students. Then 2015 Canada government introduced the IELTS requirements, and then the student surge happened from 30-40,000 to almost more than 200,000. Now in that scenario, if we look at it, that this large number of students started going in, and it becomes in the last few years the destinations. But when students arrived in Canada, they realized that job is not automatic, immigration is not automatic. They were finding it difficulties to get a job related to their occupation. Forget about the any odd jobs, but related to their occupations. And if they do not have all these things together, it will
Then what's
not
the
convert
point?
into
It's not
immigration.
adding up. The math is not adding up. The effort is not adding up. The student loans are not adding up. That's a very important point. Let me get in Sanam Arora on that. Sanam,
Yeah.
which is the fact that it's not just the Trump administration effect. It's just 100 days old. The data that we are talking about is actually going back 4 years. In the last 4 years, the sharpest fall one has seen of Indian students going to US, UK and Canada. Explain to us that what's the scenario like in the UK, which is suddenly now a not so attractive a destination for Indian students.
I'd actually say that, overall, everywhere in the world, in all the Western English-speaking markets, we're seeing a decline more generally from India. Partially, it's because, as you correctly said, about the employment situation in those countries. As growth has dried up in those countries, so have employment opportunities. Partially, it's down to the fact that there's all this geopolitical tension, anti-globalization, and the consideration of students as immigrants. So a lot of this is very political as opposed to economic as well. But in the UK, the numbers have dropped by just under 20%. There are two main reasons why that happened. In fact, three main reasons why that happened. The first is last year in the UK, there was a ban on dependents. So students who previously could bring any dependents over now cannot bring dependents over on the student visa, apart from any research courses. Now, majority of Indian students go to study postgraduate taught courses, which means they can't take their dependents on that anymore. So that has had a disproportionately high impact on the numbers choosing to go to the study in the UK. The second is that the pound has obviously escalated considerably. And if you look at the numbers, even right now, the pound is some 113 rupees to a pound or so. So that value, the exchange rate has actually considerably increased in favor of GBP, which is obviously making it much more expensive for Indians to go abroad. And finally, there is some element of this is hyper exaggeration though, because after COVID, there was a massive rise in the overall numbers that chose to go to the UK, that chose to go to other destinations as well. So some of this fall, some of this 20% that we're seeing in the UK is what I would call a correction, a natural correction in terms of the numbers of students. I'm actually speaking to you from Bangalore at the moment, where we are speaking to thousands of students who are thinking about their study abroad options. I can tell you that on the ground, and I've already been in 3 other cities in South and West India, they're all now looking at the UK as their big study destination as opposed to the US. So the US flow is definitely moving towards the UK. At the moment,
so the US flow may be moving towards the UK, but the fact is, you said some of these numbers, a 20% dip actually means 1 in 5. It's not a very small dip that we are talking about, which also brings me to ask Mr. Ajmera that if you were to advise students, their parents, their families, who are concerned about visa restrictions, more changes which are restrictive in nature, which are the other geographies you would probably advise them to explore? Would that be Australia? Would that be some other country? What would that be? And specifically, if you could give maybe for courses, that would be even more helpful.
See, that's exactly what needs to be done, that the student has to do their homework. If I say about the permanent immigrations of the Canada or a USA, hasn't changed in the last 30 years. It hasn't changed. But people or students are presuming that if I go to Canada, I get my immigrations, I get my jobs, and life is set. And that homework is not being done by the students, and that's why they're going to face the same difficulties, whichever country they do it. So my advice to students and to the parents would be that before you choose the even new destinations, like for Germany or New Zealand or Australia, make sure that you have got a confirmed information from a reliable sources or an immigration lawyer or an agent, whereby you know that what you're going to study, what is in the demand, how I'm going to get a job, and how I'm going to get my immigration. That all these 3 questions should be answered before you even start applying for a university. You cannot just presume that, okay, I apply to Australia or a UK or Germany, and my life is set for the job and for the immigration. And that planning is lacking.
You're making a point, but also there's, it's not as simplistic as that. Most people who go abroad know that life is not set till all things fall in place. It's more than that. But Sanam, the other thing I want to ask you is that there is growing uncertainty, isn't it? And some of it is a carry-on probably from 22, 23 onwards. UK started seeing the dip in the number of international students even before the US and Canada. Talk to us about the uncertainty that one is seeing in European countries, which is impacting outlook for students coming in.
In countries like the UK, it was because we had a lot of constant policy flip-flopping, as I call it, under the last few governments that we had under the Tories. One day you had a graduate visa route, which is a 2-year post-study work visa that you get if you go to UK to study. Another day you didn't. Another day it was put under review and then it wasn't. Like last year as well, there was a whole review process the graduate route was put under. What that does and those sorts of things. Now, Australia has gone through a similar amount of noise in the last year or two, where their parliament's been proposing things. And Canada is obviously, we've all seen what's been happening between India and Canada on various relations. So for all the large Western-speaking markets, as well as countries like the UK and some others in Europe, because of the whole anti-globalization sort of wave that seems to have hit us in the world, the uncertainty is coming from the fact that you have right wing versus left wing, and students are being thought of as immigrants, which is totally incorrect. Students should not be seen as immigrants. They are actually students who are looking for some work experience opportunity after. So in the UK, we now finally have a very stable government and a very stable understanding of what a student's desires are. And therefore, this post-study work offer continues to be in place in the United Kingdom. And we are actually seeing an upturn in numbers as we look at the next big intake, which is in September 2025.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me on a story that impacts lives, it impacts careers, and it impacts families around the world, particularly in India. Bottom line, viewers, is that globally the trend is that international students are welcome, but they are only welcome till the day they are paying their tuition fees. But remember, they form a very large chunk of revenues for universities. They form a large chunk of global talent pool for the economies of US, UK and Canada. Regressive practices, retrograde sentiments that make highly qualified talent pool unacceptable, make them feel like pariahs in a country that needs these talented people, is a trend that will only amplify international students, particularly those coming from India, to evaluate other opportunities. Visa restrictions should be in place which are legitimate, which are acceptable, but one that are driven by trends, one that are driven by fear or xenophobic tendencies will actually mean that global talent will go elsewhere.